Recently, I posted a video about how solitary healing is worse than Fermata and the other 4-star Nihility Light Cones, but a lot of you had questions about using In the Name of the World and Resolution shines as Pearls of Sweat instead. So in this video, I want to address the questions by making a complete guide of side-by-side comparisons and analyses of Fermata, Eyes of the Prey, Goodnight Sleep Well, Solitary Healing, and In the Name of the World from Superimposition 1 to 5 for Kafka, Luka, and Sampo, while considering skill points and team rotations. Then at the end, we will discuss Resolution shines as Pearls of Sweat. I do want to mention that there are a lot of factors that affect the outcome of the calculations. For example, the eidolons of your characters, the substats you get from your relics, how many times your characters are hit, and many others. So your calculation might be different from mine. But two things that I really want to emphasize are, first, break effects won't be considered because not only is it difficult to predict when you break enemies, but you also cannot guarantee that the enemy will have the weakness of the characters using the light cones with break effects. And second, these calculations are made for the later stages of Memory of Chaos where you will need to deal with 2 elite enemies or bosses, and where you need to apply the dot debuffs on both. With that out of the way, let's start with Kafka. KAFKA'S damage comes from her follow-up attack from her talent, and from the dots enemies receive when they take turns or when Kafka uses her skill and ultimate. Her rotation is very simple, just use skill every turn. From all the 4-star light cones, Goodnight Sleep Well is undoubtedly the best light cone for Kafka, as it provides a huge damage increase for Kafka's natural dot procs at enemies' turns, and also dot procs from Kafka's skill and ultimate. Goodnight Sleep Well also increases the damage from her follow-up attacks. Fermata provides a similar effect but at a much lower damage increase. Eyes of the Prey on the other hand provides only damage increase for dots, but because it has a higher number than Fermata, it does perform slightly better than Fermata. What is interesting is how Goodnight Sleep Well performs against the 5-star light cones, In the Name of the World, and Solitary Healing. Against Solitary Healing, the problem as mentioned in my previous video is that Solitary Healing's dot damage increase only lasts for 2 turns after using ultimate. For Kafka's rotation, even if she uses her skill every turn, she won't get a 2-turn ult rotation in most situations. She'll usually need 3 turns. Besides that, Goodnight Sleep Well also provides a much higher damage increase for dots, and it also provides a damage increase for Kafka's talent. So it's no doubt that Solitary Healing performs worse even though it has a slightly higher base attack stats. Against In the Name of the World, Goodnight Sleep Well is still better. Even though Kafka uses her skill every turn, which means that you can trigger the attack percentage increase and the damage increase from In the Name of the World, the problem is that the attack percentage increase only comes into play on Kafka's turn when using her skill. This means that the attack percentage is not increased when Kafka is using her talent follow-up attack or when she is using her ultimate. And because Goodnight Sleep Well has a much higher damage increase, Goodnight Sleep Well is more superior in terms of damage. For the ranking of the light cones and the general idea of the damage Kafka can deal with each light cone at each superimposition, you can view the following. On to Luka. Luka's main sources of damage are from his own extremely high damage multiplier from his bleed, his own ability to force his own bleed dot when he uses his enhanced basic attack, and the forced bleed dots from Kafka's skill and ultimate. His rotation is to use skill to reapply bleed on the enemies and otherwise use his basic attacks. Similar to the points I made for Kafka's light cone comparisons, Luka's best light cone is Goodnight Sleep Well. But you do want to give Kafka Goodnight Sleep Well instead of Luka because Kafka using it will be able to dish out more damage compared to Luka using it. So the second best light cone option for Luka is In the Name of the World. And this is because In the Name of the World's higher attack stacks and consistent damage increase. If you don't have In the Name of the World, his third best light cone is Eyes of the Prey because Luka's main source of damage is from his bleed dot, and Eyes of the Prey provides the same amount of damage increase as In the Name of the World. But my personal advice is to use Fermata instead because you want Eyes of the Prey for Sampo, which I will explain why later. As for Solitary Healing, it's unfortunately much worse for Luka because Luka has higher energy requirement to use his ultimate, meaning less ultimates and lower uptime on the dot damage increase provided by Solitary Healing. For the ranking of the light cones and the general idea of the damage Luka can deal with each light cone at each superimposition level, you can view the following. Finally, the last character in the dot team is Sampo. Sampo's main sources of damage come from his wind shear stacks, the forced wind shear dots from KAFKA'S skill and ultimate, and his high skill damage multipliers. Unfortunately for Sampo though, you won't be using his skills a lot in the later MOC stages, where you need more skill points for Luka to reapply bleed to 2 different elite enemies, so this means that you will be using Sampo's basic attacks more. Because of that, most of his damage will also be coming from the dots caused by KAFKA and when enemies take turns. So the light cones he wants will also be similar to the light cones Luka wants. Good Night Sleep Well is still the best light cone for Sampo, but if you have it, you should give it to KAFKA because it provides the most damage increase for your team. In the Name of the World is his second best, but you want that for Luka, so the third best option is Eyes of the Prey. You want Eyes of the Prey, so you have to rely less on getting good effect hit rate substats for Sampo in his relics. This is because Sampo has a very low base chance of inflicting wind shear at 65% against an enemy with a 40% effect resistance. This means that you only have a 39% chance of inflicting wind shear. Although Sampo's traces do provide some effect hit rate, he will need more. For reference, you'll need around 58% effect hit rate to get a 62% chance to land wind shear on an enemy with 40% effect resistance. And Eyes of the Prey helps this a lot, so it's his third best. If you do not have any spare light cones though, Fermata is still better than Solitary Healing, because Sampo will generate ultimate quite slowly as he will basic attack most of the time. For the ranking of the light cones and the general idea of the damage Sampo can deal with each light cone, you can view the following. The final light cone to be discussed is Resolution Shines' Pearls of Sweat, and we are discussing it in a separate section because of how it affects the team damage as a whole. Because of how it works, the exact value of damage it increases also depends on what light cones your other teammates are using. Unfortunately, equipping Resolution to increase team damage usually results in lower overall damage compared to just using Fermata on the character equipping Resolution. Even if we were to equip Luka or Sampo with S5 Resolution and the other 2 dot characters with the highest damage light cone S5 Good Night Sleep Well, the damage increase it provides by lowering the enemy's defenses is still not enough. It can perform better than Fermata though if you are able to find a way to debuff 2 enemies in one action, but you usually cannot do that when you're using Luka or Sampo. With Luka, it's pretty straightforward because he is single target focused and because of that can only debuff 1 enemy in his action. With Sampo, he can occasionally debuff 2 enemies when he uses his skill or his ultimate, but it's not a 100% uptime because he wants to use basic attacks to gain skill points for Luka and KAFKA. As such, using the free Fermata is usually better than using Resolution. Overall, the most ideal situation is to just use S5 Good Night Sleep Well on all 3 characters, but because that is impossible for most people, you'll have to distribute the light cones equipped by each character already discussed in the video. I understand that there will be a lot of questions about your own personal team combinations and light cones, so ask them in the comments and I'll get to them. But for those of you who want to deep dive into the calculations, I've already included the sheet in the description. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more guides.